I want to have a look at tourism now, and let's catch up with John Hart in the Sydney CBD. He heads up the Australian Chamber's tourism section. Thanks for joining us again, John. I appreciate it. We're starting to see domestic tourism open up quite strongly with school holidays upon us. You must be really worried about what's happening in Victoria, putting the kibosh on all of that.
Well, Chris, we've said all along that we see that opening happening in step 3, and that's the National Cabinet's decision. They had said all the way along that there would be localised outbreaks and that they would be managed, and that shouldn't stop us proceeding with the roadmap, opening domestic tourism and then opening the bubble with New Zealand and the Pacific.
But you've got businesses literally dying in Queensland, and you've got airlines laying off thousands of staff, and one of them obviously coming out of receivership. And yet we're not even encouraging people to holiday in this country. Queensland still has its borders shut. This is self-harm, isn't it? Economic self-harm.
Well, Chris, if you look at the ABS data that came out last week, 15% of businesses in tourism said they won't last another 3 weeks if we don't start seeing a significant uptick in tourism. So that's 150,000 jobs that are on the line if we don't get back to tourism within that 3 to 4 week period.
Well, what are we going to do about this? I mean, because you're fighting against state governments who seem to be overreacting, priding themselves on sort of zero infection levels and the rest of it. No imagination, no idea of perhaps having a temperature check on everybody who lands at Brisbane Airport or whatnot. They seem to be just thumbing their nose at the viability of such a crucial industry, especially for Queensland.
Well, that's why the National Cabinet needs to reinforce the roadmap that they've put out, Chris, that says in step 3, which is July, that we'll have all domestic tourism back up and running. And it also says that we'll have the bubble open with New Zealand Pacific. And we can't stop that progress. There's too much at stake here. We've got a sizable number of jobs. We've got 15% of the businesses. And in the case of the bubble, we've got $47 million worth of exports each and every day that will be delayed if we don't proceed with the roadmap timetable.
Well, let's talk about the bubble. That's the idea that Australia and New Zealand, because we're so well quarantined and have dealt with the virus so well, we could open up travel between our two countries, which would be very good for the tourism industry on both sides of the Tasman. Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, was asked about this today. Have a look.
Is a bubble just simply unrealistic this year?
No, I wouldn't say that. But as I say, so much does depend on some of the decisions that are ultimately for Australia. So no, I wouldn't say unrealistic. But you can understand, of course, why New Zealand has a very high bar. We want to ensure that we maintain our status.
Sky News' own Jackson Williams with that question in New Zealand today. John, she's open to it, but this is the problem is any setback is going to be used against this. And at the moment, what's happening in Victoria is going to be pushing back plans for, well, we can't even get domestic travel up. So obviously it's going to delay that bubble.
Well, I think, Chris, the New Zealand Prime Minister did say today that a lot of this was down to the decisions to be taken by the Australian government. And we know those decisions being made by the National Cabinet say very clearly that the bubble should be in step 3, and the Prime Minister has reiterated that step 3 would be July. So we know that our businesses are desperate to have the bubble become a reality. We know that we've got 150,000 jobs on the line if we don't get that significant uptick in activity by the time we hit the end of the July month. So bring it on. We have to make it happen. We have to make it happen in a safe way. And we've suggested a proof of concept flight that travels between Canberra and Wellington, because those two cities are those jurisdictions in which we've had incredible history in management of the virus. So what we need to do is get the bubble open, get an aircraft in the air and prove that this thing can happen.
You must really hate New Zealanders. You want to force them to holiday in Canberra, but I would have gone like the Sydney-Queenstown option or something like that. Maybe the Cairns-Queenstown. Just finally, do you think our politicians... look, we all love Canberra, don't get me wrong, we all love Canberra, but it's not thought of as a great holiday destination. Do you fear that our politicians, especially our state politicians, our premiers, have been a victim here of Australia's success, that because we've done so well in crushing the infection, we're being overly cautious, so we're not willing to accept any sort of minor rate of community transmission.
I think our success is a factor here, Chris, but we need to keep coming back to the National Cabinet's decision, which is that the roadmap will proceed. We're on a suppression strategy. We know there will be localised outbreaks. We know we have the facilities and measures in place to manage them, and we need to make sure that that doesn't stop us moving forward where we can with the rest of the roadmap.
Thanks for joining us, John. Good luck.
Thanks, Chris.